In this lesson, we will set up the ScanlineRender node to view the 2D version of our 3D scene, and we'll add a camera and some keyframes to the camera's movement to make the shot feel more dynamic over time. Okay, so we're right here where we left off in our last lesson, and we want to be able to view this image that we're looking at here in 3D, but it's pretty difficult to see it in a 2D version. If we just hit that 2D, nothing shows up. So we need a ScanlineRender node to show us what that 2D view looks like. So we're just going to hover over this empty area in our node graph here, hit the Tab key, and you can type in scan, and that'll bring up ScanlineRender for you. And then let's go ahead and take a look at the pipes we've got here. So we've got the object scene, the background, and the camera. So I want to plug in my object scene pipe to the scene that we created in the last lesson. So we'll go ahead and do that. And then let's plug into that ScanlineRender. Now there's a few other things we need to plug up before we can view this as a 2D image, and one of them is a camera and one of them is a background. So let's go ahead and do the camera now. I'll just hover over the empty area, hit Tab, type in camera. Whoops, not camera shake. There you go. And then we'll plug in that camera pipe just like that. You can go ahead and straighten that out if you want to, and you can see that we're able to see that camera just kind of looking right here. We've got a nice amount of space between our camera. Since we kind of started at that 0.5 mark, we've got a little bit of room. So we may need to bring the camera a little farther forward, but for now this is fine. Now let's go ahead and plug in our background. For our background, we're going to want to plug in a constant. So a constant is going to tell everything what size we want that final render to be. It's not really going to be visible in our image. It's just going to be there as kind of a guide. So let's go ahead and hit Tab and type in constant. And then we'll just go ahead and plug that in to the background pipe. And then let's tell the constant what size we need. Looks like we've already got the root format set up because we did that 1280 by 720. So that's perfect. We do need to tell it our frame range is from frame 1 to 100. So that's going to give us our whole video that we're going to be creating. Okay, so now that that has been created, let's go ahead and try to view our video as a 2D image. So come up here to 3D, hit 2D, and it looks like we have some data. So right first off, our camera looks a little too low. So let's go ahead and start moving that around. I'm going to go ahead and X out of everything, and then we'll just open up the camera there in our properties bin. Okay, so let's translate the camera up a little bit. Let's just try a 1. Obviously way too high. So let's try a 0.5. A little bit better, but still too high. So let's do a 0.25. And I have a feeling this is going to be very similar to what we were doing whenever we were figuring out our camera earlier on. So kind of typing in these values is a little bit difficult. So let's move back over to our 3D. And I basically realized that my camera was still a little too high, so I need to push it down a bit. And it also needs to go backwards a bit, just to kind of catch a little bit more of that water. Now let's go back into our 2D and see what we can see. All right, this is getting better, but still needs to go further back and down. So we'll just move this down a bit and back. Okay, now we're getting a lot closer. So one of the things that I want to make sure that we do is let's kind of try to keep this piece as the idea of what should be on the outside of the frame. So this piece right here is just kind of coming to that edge, but we've got these other pieces that aren't big enough. So we're going to need to scale those up. So let's come over here and start with the sky. So double click on that card node 1 that we have for the sky, and let's just start dragging up that uniform scale. Okay, so that's helping quite a bit. Now you don't want to go too big, so sometimes I'll kind of keep taking this back down until I find a number that's sort of right on the edge. So that one looks pretty close. So we'll stick with a 0.8, just like that. Okay, let's move on to the mountains. Card 2, just double clicked that. And let's try the same thing. Let's do a 1.8 for that. Way too big. So let's do a 1.2. Too small. Let's just try dragging it and see how it changes. So that one is pretty close. We just need it to be a little bit bigger. Let's try a 1.48. Great. Okay. So I'm going to move this down a little bit just so I can still see the sky here at the beginning. And then now let's just move on to card 3. So I'll go ahead and open that one up. And let's change this one's scale to about a 1.5. Let's see what that does. Again, probably a little bit too large. So let's do a 1.25. It looks pretty good, but it could still probably be a little bit smaller. So let's just try a 1.2. Okay, probably a little bit too, I would say in this case, a little bit too small. So we'll do a 1.23. Okay, so that's pretty close. If it's lacking a little bit on this side, we can always pull this down a bit and just have that painted in part kind of go under the water. So that's probably going to work out just fine for us. Let's go ahead and open up card 4. I'm just going to move this down a bit so that house is a little more visible. And then let's grab card 6, which is our water, and pull this back towards us. Now I don't want to pull it down, so I'm going to undo that. And let's see, back towards us, let's just see what a negative 0.1 will do to it. So now that these are in different places, a negative 0.1 looks like it actually pushes the water down. So we're actually going to be changing the Z value to move it closer to us. So that might be a little bit confusing. Let's move out to our 3D view just so this makes a little bit more sense. So you see how low that water is? I'm going to go ahead and grab that Z value. We'll pull it back up, but we'll grab the Y value and push it closer to the camera, just like that. Okay, let's move back into that 2D view. That looks a lot better, but we're still missing out on some information right here. So let's go back in. I want this water to extend all the way to kind of just where I am here at the bottom. So back into the 3D view. And this just honestly takes a little bit of guesswork, just kind of pushing this around until you find the perfect spot. Okay, so this looks good. I think we could just maybe make it a little bit bigger. Let's move over back to the 3D tab. And right now we have the scale for this at a 6. Let's just try an 8. And I think that that's going to do it for us. So just right about here, we'll move into that 2D. Perfect. Okay, that's looking really good. So now all we need to do is kind of move down our dock a little bit. It looks a little high. So that's going to be our card 5. And we'll just push this down until it comes a little bit closer to the water. Looks like right about there. Maybe a little bit over to the left a bit. And if you want it to go backwards in Z space, sometimes the easiest thing to do is to just come back into your 3D view. So you can see how far that is away from the land. I want it to feel like it's attaching to the land, but it's not going all the way through. So just kind of like that. Now let's go back into our 2D view. Perfect. That's right where I wanted it. Okay, so now our scene looks pretty great. It's sort of all back in position. And that might kind of just beg the question, why did we break all of this apart in Z space in the first place? And the reason is that now we have the ability to start moving the camera around. So just kind of starting here on this first frame, let's go ahead and set a keyframe for our camera. So I'm going to just clear the properties bin really quickly. And we'll move down here so that we can see the camera, and we'll open the camera up. So I want to change the translation and also maybe a little bit the rotation of the camera. But for now, let's just change the translation. So I'm going to right click on that translate and tell it to set a key. And you'll notice that I was careful to make sure I was on the first frame where I set that key. Now let's move forward to frame 100, and I'm just going to push the camera in just kind of for a zoom. So let's move back into our 3D view and just push that camera in a little bit. Now let's see what that looks like if we go back to 2D. Okay, pretty good. I mean, very simple, but it works. So looks like we have a little bit of a problem right here where this is kind of just sticking out. So let's go ahead and pull that one down here. Wasn't as visible until we pushed in on that card. So that was card 4 that one was stored on. And I'll just pull this down until it kind of goes into the water. So now this just feels like it kind of has a slow, gradual sink into the water, and then this is behind it. Totally fine. Still, as an image, looks pretty great. If you need to, you could even pull this over a little bit further in this direction, because we do have more information over there. But you want to be careful that when you're on frame 1, it's not sticking all the way out. So maybe just find the very last pixel that it can be sitting on if you want that to be a possibility. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and hit play and just see what we've created. It's going to take a second to cache these frames, so I'm going to go ahead and pause it until they're all cached. Okay, so those frames have been cached, and you can see what a nice little kind of push in we have with our camera here. And we're getting a little bit of parallax too, so you're able to kind of see how this piece looks like it's getting closer to the camera because it is. So the faster it moves, the closer it must be to the camera. So that's kind of what gives it this depth feel instead of just being a flat image that we're making bigger or scaling up to make it look like we have faked a zoom basically. But I think we could push this even further by adding a little bit of rotation to the camera. So in our next lesson, I'm going to show you how to add some rotation keyframes to the camera, and then also how it's going to maybe change a little bit of the way that we have this scene set up and some of the troubleshooting we have to do. But it's definitely going to make the shot look better, so it'll be worth it. So stick around and we'll learn how to add rotation to the camera in the next lesson.